The atmosphere says El Nino, but what about the ocean? I'm Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, February 11th.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, essential data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
Be sure and like and subscribe. Ring the bell. You get automatic notifications when the videos are posted, typically on Sunday evenings. Just do click the little Stormsurf icon down there in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. That'll get you all set up. And if you'd like to make a donation, you may. Hit the special thanks button down below, the heart with the $sign in it. With that, I'd like to thank the folks that donated last week. Will 2. A incredibly generous contribution. Thank you so much, Will. I really appreciate it. And then, of course, Evolution Moto, another longtime contributor. New contributor, Brad Pettinger. E. Slate also has contributed before, and Gabby AM. Thank you all so much for your contributions. And now with that, let's get to work. And please pardon my voice this evening. I'm a little bit under the weather, but not so bad that I can't do this. It's just my voice is a little bit shot. All right, so let's start by looking at significant wave heights for the North Pacific Ocean. Right now, a pretty calm pattern, a little bit of remnants of some sort of a gale up here in the northern Gulf, but a new system. It doesn't look like much at the moment, pushing off of Japan, but this is going to get very interesting the next 3 or 4 days. But first off, let's just take a look at current conditions. We'll start in Northern California, Point Reyes buoy, number 029 off of course Point Reyes. We're looking at all the energy that's hitting that buoy from anywhere up at 33.3 second period energy, and we see a tenth of a foot of energy there, and we see a spike of energy somewhere here in the 14 to 16 second period range. This from a swell that's just started hitting Northern California about 11 o'clock this morning, something like that. And then this graph goes the whole way down to 5 second period pure wind chop. It is, when you get these longer period swells like this, all this short period junk right here, that doesn't help anything. It really actually kind of messes up the pure long period swell. So it's not like these things all add in. It is the peak energy right here that we're most interested in. So we'll take a look. We have some fancy math to process at 6.8 feet at 14.1 seconds from 286 degrees. Theoretically, that would put surf in about the 9.5 foot range, and that's pretty much what it was today. And then there's that wind swell, 3 feet at 10 seconds from 294 degrees, and that pretty much doesn't matter. Also, the chop factor, 1.7 feet. This is energy anywhere from 2 to 5 seconds. Seemed like things were a bit junkier than that. Maybe in the 2 to 2.2 range, something like that. But so it wasn't pristine clean today, but there definitely was surf. Let's go take a look down south. The Point Loma South buoy off of San Diego, 191. Same deal, looking at all the energy hitting there. We see a little bump of 18-second energy and 16-second stuff. This is the beginnings of the same swell that's hitting up in Northern California, but filtered through the Channel Islands. Anyway, you look at this. Primary swell, 1.8 feet at 13.2 seconds from 248 degrees. And you really look at the curve and you go, well, it could be any of these numbers here. It's sort of a split. Oh, and there you go. The secondary swell, 1.3 feet at 18.1 seconds. This swell theoretically could produce surf of 2.4 feet, and this swell could produce theoretically 2.3 feet, so that's why the 18-second period one is the secondary swell, but this doesn't account for shoaling and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, you get the idea. Surf in about the, we'll say, thigh-high range. And then we go to the north shore of Oahu, the Waimea Bay buoy, number 106. We do see a little spike of energy. This is the fading energy from that same swell that's hitting North California and the swell that is just starting to arrive in Southern California. They have peak energy about 11.8 seconds. Primary swell, 4.5 feet at 11.8 seconds from 319 degrees. That would put surf in about the 5 foot range Hawaiian, and that's probably about what it was. And then some secondary wind swell from 2.3 feet at 8.6 seconds from 252 degrees. Pretty much non-significant. All right, so let's go back in time. We're going to Wednesday, the 7th of February. Little gale developed here, the date line right there. Little area here of seas, 23.7 feet, the highest seas over this entire domain. This gale started pushing off to the east while building and lifting northeast. Seas at 29 feet on Wednesday night, and then up to 36 feet on Thursday morning, pushing to 39 feet about 10 a.m. Pacific time in the northwestern Gulf of Alaska, and then fading Thursday afternoon into Friday morning. That swell has pretty much already passed the Hawaiian Islands, like we said before, hitting northern California, or probably pretty much past its peak there, and starting to arrive in southern California. So what's to come for the future? This is where things get very interesting. We're going to start by looking at jet stream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales. When those gales form, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough. That is a dip in the jet. You can see it right there. What that helps do is create a counterclockwise flow, like an eddy aloft in the atmosphere up at 30,000 feet. But if it's strong enough, that also manifests itself down at the ocean surface as low pressure. And low pressure, of course, if it's strong enough, generates winds. Winds start to impart energy to the ocean, get traction on the ocean surface, create seas. Seas, as they radiate away from the fetch area, the shorter period energy from those seas fades off. And you end up with swell. And, of course, swell, when it hits your beach, turns into surf. So we have a pretty energetic jet stream here with 200-knot winds pushing off Japan, falling down, feeding this trough right in here. Then the jet splits somewhere due north of Hawaii. When you get a split jet, you see one branch going that way, one going that way. Actually, it's two going that way. You typically get high pressure in that area. Split jet stream, not good for surf production. A consolidated jet, much better. Right, we'll put this into motion, see what's going to happen as we get into Monday. Notice the trough continues to build. The consolidated jet pushes more off to the east. This is what is going to be interesting. We get a little teaser trough starting to develop here. High pressure holding over California on Tuesday. And then you just see the consolidated jet pushing closer and closer to California. But also notice behind that, the jet splitting. So this is likely the last hurrah for our real El Nino-like pattern. We'll see why in a minute. But anyway, as we get into Thursday, you see the jet starting to dig out here off of Baja in Southern California. The real energy starting to push closer to the coast. Thursday, still not so much an issue. The trough continuing, if anything, building, being supported by 170 to almost 180 knot winds. This would likely be a great place for a big old gale to be circulating in the Gulf of Alaska as we get into Friday. And then Saturday, more of the same. The jet actually surging onshore. Perhaps another atmospheric river event. Probably not as strong as the last one, but this will probably be the last real AR event, like a El Nino type AR event of the season. As we get in Saturday night into Sunday, you can see it pushing into Central California, Point Conception, then falling south towards Baja. And then here we are on Sunday night, the jet starting to split across the Pacific, the last of it pushing into California. But the jet is just the foundation, the support for gale development. It is actually winds blowing on the ocean surface that make surf. So we're looking here at surface level pressure and surface level winds. There's a little tiny gale here up north of Hawaii with 45 knot winds, but not really doing a whole lot. This one here off of northern Japan as of right now is the one really to watch. So we get into Monday. This gale pushes up to the north, all the fetch aimed at Alaska, of no concern for our forecast area. But this guy over here starts building, nothing too impressive looking. 45, maybe 50 knot winds on Monday night. Into Tuesday, it starts to build with a broader area of 40 to 45 knot winds targeting Hawaii directly. A teaser gale, there's a pinch trough right up here, starts also developing with 40, almost 45 knot winds aimed at California. Then we get into Wednesday. This guy really takes over, steals all the energy, 50 knot winds aimed directly at Hawaii. And close by, what is it, for every 5 degrees north, that's 300 nautical miles. So 1, 2, 3, about 900 nautical miles northwest of Hawaii. That's pretty close, probably resulting in pretty raw swell. But Wednesday's supposed to be the main day in terms of energy impartation to the ocean surface to produce swell. The gale continues off to the east on Thursday, still just filling the Gulf of Alaska. Another system builds off of north of Japan, lifting northeast with up to 55 knot winds. Notice this gale filling the entire Gulf of Alaska, just really now taking aim on California, front pushing into northern California. Secondary fetch building as we get into Friday night. Notice 55, maybe even 60 knot winds up here in the North Dateline region. Pretty far to the north, but still swell could result from that. And then as you get into Saturday, the two systems almost merge and you just have this huge fetch of 30 knot winds or greater aimed right at anywhere like the U.S. West Coast, mainly for California. Pretty impressive system. And then as we get into Sunday, things start moderating. What are the effects of those winds on the ocean surface? Well, we'll put this into motion and find out. This gale, we're not even worried about. Here's the main event. Monday starts getting organized west of the dateline with 35-foot seas. As we get into Tuesday, kind of backs off 28 to maybe 30-foot seas. The teaser gale has 26-foot seas aimed at California and Oregon, Pacific Northwest. But it's when we get into Wednesday, things start getting interesting. What do we have? 39 to almost 40-foot seas here. But then quickly by 10 a.m. Wednesday Pacific time, seas go to 44 feet, and then they go to 50 feet late Wednesday. Wednesday night, they're still at 44 feet. And then as we go into Thursday morning, 42 feet and fading. I mean, you can see a wall of big seas just pushing right at Hawaii, also aimed at probably, I will say from San Francisco southward, but certainly down into Baja and places like that should see rather large swell. And given the southward displacement of this thing, I mean, at its peak, let's go back and take a look here real quick. Right about there, it's like, 33 north. That is very good for Southern California for large, probably raw swell, but nonetheless swell from a south angle. Take what you can get, make the most of it. This is probably the last of these for the season. I hate to say that, but probably. Okay, as we get into Friday night, new system starts developing on the North Dateline region, 44-foot seas aimed off to the east. But quickly heading up into the Bering Sea, still a good amount of 34, 35-foot seas aimed off to the east. That's good for a rather north-angled swell, maybe side-glancing swell for Hawaii and certainly for the U.S. West Coast north of Point Conception. And then we're out a week and things start settling down as the jet starts splitting. Also, someone asked if we could, in the comments section, and of course, if you have comments or suggestions, please write them up down below, and we try to respond. They suggested, hey, can you take a look at the southern hemi, because there is some activity going on, and they were correct. There's this little system that we're going back in time Friday, 2 days ago. Little system passed south of the Tasman Sea. That could push some very small swell up into exposed breaks, maybe filtered by Fiji for the south shore of Oahu. There's also this little gale that tried to develop right there with 29-foot seas, lifting somewhat to the north. That was on Sunday. So possible swell for, down into northern Chile, Peru, Central America for sure. The real question is, will it get buried by larger swell coming from the north? I guess it all depends on where you're surfing and what sort of exposure your break has. And then there's another system that tried to push off under New Zealand. Now that's Hindcast. Let's go look at the forecast real quick. And one would think, oh, it's starting to wake up in the southern hemi, but it's pretty much an anomaly for this point in time here. We're just blasting through the next week's forecast. Yeah, there's seas. They're all falling due south. Nothing really aimed off to the north. And even this system up here, same sort of deal. I mean, maybe some sideband energy for the south shore of Oahu from that on, we're almost a week out. Who knows if that'll even form. So it's a bit early. I would say late March, early April is when I'd really start looking at the southern hemi in earnest. All right, quick look at local winds. Hawaii here with light trades for the moment. California with light winds. Finally, it is nice to have a break, but here we go. The wind machine starts setting up onshore winds as we get into Monday. Pretty light for the Hawaiian Islands, light winds for California. Tuesday, still this kind of, you can just barely see it here, a light northwest flow for Hawaii and a light northwest flow for California, but yet the sense of what is coming as we get into Wednesday. Here we go. The whole Gulf filled with just storm system and unruly conditions, light onshore flow here for the Hawaiian Islands. California, not so bad for the moment. So we get into Thursday. Here comes the front from this big low, just pushing down the Hawaiian Islands, probably right about at the same time as swell starts to arrive and just starts blowing northwest at 15 knots. California is still relatively protected. So we get into Friday, though. Here's the front, a mess. Not yet, but north of, we'll say, the Golden Gate, south winds take in effect. North winds continue for the Hawaiian Islands. Saturday, south winds still in effect. A mess for Hawaii. And Sunday, still trades trying to develop later on, maybe even Sunday morning. And California, just a blown out mess north of, we'll say, Point Conception. But then the all-important rain and snow forecast. California's here, Point Conception right there, Southern California down here, Monterey Bay right there, San Francisco right there, the Oregon-California border right there. We'll put this into motion. Not a whole lot going on till we get into Wednesday, limited to Cape Mendocino, maybe down as far as the Golden Gate. And that's just sort of a teaser event. And yes, look at that, maybe just a hair bit of snow for limited to Tahoe at best. And then you see the bigger system building off the coast. As we get into Saturday, that starts pushing inland, rain down into Morro Bay, Point Conception. As we get into Saturday night, some snow for the Sierra, not anything too bad. Then we get into Sunday night. The rain starts encroaching into Southern California and all of North and Central California, with snow developing late Sunday night for the Sierra. Oh, and that was our 1 week cutoff there. So a tease, don't know if I believe a model that far out, but it definitely looks like another and probably the last serious bout of rain for California. That's not to say there won't be more, but in terms of big muscular atmospheric river events, and even this one won't compare to the last one, because the last one was about as heavy as it can get, certainly for Southern California down there. Certain places got solid 10 inches of rain in the LA area, which is pretty much unprecedented. So it is kind of interesting because everyone was asking, when is the rain going to come for California? Well, it's come, but it's like in these short little bursts, it just dumps and then it dries up and then it dumps. It's not like last year where it was continuous. Again, that is the PDO interacting with our El Nino. And we're going to look at some totals and sort of get a sense of what's going on. But anyway, snow forecast dashboard for Palisades, Tahoe. Looking at, this goes out 10 days to February 21st, maybe about 30 inches of snow. We go to Kirkwood they're expecting 36 inches. In Mammoth, you'd think there'd be more given how high it is and how much colder it is, but only about maybe 16 or 18 inches. And then we look at the freeze levels for Palisades, Tahoe. This is the base there, pretty low at 6,200 feet, this black line. The top line here, the summit up at the top of Granite Chief at 9,000 feet. The blue is temperatures 28 degrees or less. The white, 32 to 28 degrees. The gray line is sleet, which is like 32 degrees to 35 degrees. And anything above that is pretty much considered rain. So you see the freeze level right here at the intersection of the gray and the white, dropping down to the base as we get into, late on the 13th and the 14th, and then getting warmer ahead of the new storm, and then temperatures falling down with the freeze level down around, we'll say 4,000 feet, something like that, which is pretty respectable. If we get a healthy dose of moisture and these temperatures pan out, could be a nice dump of snow. All right, rainfall totals to date. So we're going to break this up. Northern California, we're going to slice that into two pieces, north of the Golden Gate and south of the Golden Gate. And north of the Golden Gate is roughly here, and that's looking at, this is normal, the percent of normal to date, about 115% of normal. For the San Francisco Bay Area and Monterey Bay, that thing, just eyeballing it, maybe 100 to 105%. And then we go down to Central California. They typically get less rainfall overall, so if you get a heavy dump, it pushes your numbers way up. You see this one station here in Death Valley, 341%. But on average, just eyeballing it, maybe 130% of normal for the date. And then Southern California, really quite an eye-opener here. You just go down, and it varies from station to station. But if just eyeballing it, you could say 200%. I'm going to be conservative and say 180%. Now we play the same game, but this is percent of normal for the entire year, which I think it goes to like October 1st or the end of September, something like that. For north of the Golden Gate, we're about 70% of normal, so it won't take too much more to get us to 100%. For the San Francisco Bay Area, about 62%. So the real question is, it's interesting how the distribution goes here, because Northern California, they typically, get a lot more rainfall. So this is not unexpected. Bay Area, we're thinking right now about average 62% of normal for the entire season. The question is, will we get to 100% or will we get over? Hard to say. We'll see how things play out. The rest of the forecast that we're going to talk about here will feed into that decision. Then we go into Central California. They're at about 75% of normal. It seems pretty reasonable that we would get, or at least Central California would get to 100% of normal. Then you go to Southern California. Well, already many locations at 100% of normal, if not considerably more. Eyeballing it, I'd say 115% of normal for that area. So a whole season's worth of rain has already fallen in a couple of relatively short duration, but very intense downburst. So El Nino living up to its hype, though not quite the way we would have expected. But still, we'll take the rainfall any way we can get it. All right, the surf forecast. We'll start up in Northern California, Ocean Beach, which is, not really Northern California, but we call it Northern Bay Area, we'll call it. 9 foot today, steadily falling down to about the 2.5 foot range on Wednesday. Things start getting messy, then we're back up to 9 feet, falling some, and then a big swell. You saw that on the charts, theoretically 20 foot, but also look at the wind speeds down here in wind direction. So this is north winds, all pretty light. That's okay. Here comes a little bout of south winds on Wednesday, and then it gets steadily more and more out of the south at 20 to 25 to 29 knots into Sunday. So a south wind event. And you can look here, swell size is 6 feet at 15 seconds, getting into Wednesday, 2.5 feet at 10 seconds, so just wind swell. And then in the 6 to 7 foot range at 12 to 13 seconds sort of thing, and then big at 12 feet at 17 seconds. San Diego, the same profile, just smaller, a little about a swell here as we get into Monday, and then fading on Tuesday in about the 3.5 foot range, then down to 1.5 feet or so. Little pulse maybe on Friday at 3.5 feet, and then a much bigger pulse as we get into Sunday at maybe 11 feet at top exposed breaks. Wind issues, here's the wind down here. Actually, the wind not looking too bad, especially on this bigger pulse. It is west at 4 or 5 knots, but that's with the islands and all that might not be too bad. And otherwise, it seems like most of the wind energy is coming in north of Point Conception. Swell sizes, 2.5 feet at 16 seconds on Monday and Tuesday. Fading from there, another little pulse here at about 2.5 feet at 13 seconds on Friday. And then you're up to 6.5 feet at 17 seconds on Sunday. Then we go to the North Shore of Oahu. Not a whole lot going on for the next couple of days. No real swell in the water, fading remnants of whatever was there, but then the big mega swell hits. 25 feet supposedly, but with 17, 18 knot north winds. Swell fades down and the winds just continue north to northeast. Finally clocking around as we get into the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, and surf sizes in the 15-foot range. So maybe that's your best window there, unless there's some place that can handle big swell and a north wind. Looking at swell sizes, well, not a whole lot. 3 feet at 10 seconds, so basically just wind swell. Then we're up to 19 feet at 17 seconds for the big pulse, and then another pulse in about the 10-foot range at 13 seconds. So no lack of swell. It's just where to go find it and how to get out of the wind. All right, let's go take a look long term. The two major influences of the weather long term are the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation right there, and of course the El Nino Southern Oscillation. We're going to start by talking about the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation. There's two phases, the active and inactive phase. They rotate around the planet from west to east on the equator, one on one side of the planet, the other on the other side of the planet. It is the active phase that is our friend. It is low pressure, and when it moves over the West Pacific, it's basically a low pressure system moving west to east on the equator. When it moves into the far West Pacific, it dampens trade winds. It also takes warm, moist air down at the ocean surface, lifts it aloft, feeds it into the jet stream, and that energy, that kinetic energy or moist energy, whatever you want to call it, feeds the jet stream, make it stronger, and then that, of course, digs out troughs and makes storms exactly like what is forecast to happen this week. We assume, well, we know, we'll just say it, that the active phase of the MJO is in control, driving that system. The inactive phase, oh, and by the way, the MJO, to move from the West Pacific to the East Pacific takes about 4 to 5, maybe 6 weeks. We've been in an active phase for 2 weeks, maybe a little bit more. So maybe there's about 2 more weeks of the active phase in the Pacific, and then things are going to start settling down after that. The inactive phase moves in as El Nino probably starts losing some of its mojo. All right, but let's see if we can verify that. We're going to look at data from the TAO buoy array, series of buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino. This is the East Pacific here. This is the West Pacific here. This is the equator. The date line is right there, the international date line. That is New Guinea there. Just looking at the arrows, these are actual 5-day average winds. There are wind sensors on the buoys. You can see just by the length of the arrows and the directions, winds are out of the east, but not particularly strong. But then you get over here to the Central Pacific, they're nuking out of the east and in the all-important Kelvin wave generation area. This is where the area, when the active phase of the MJO here, it does its most for pumping energy up into the jet streams. Wind's pretty strong out of the east, but it is not the actual wind speeds. It is the anomalies, the difference from normal for this time of year. Look here in the East Pacific, little baby arrows out of the east suggesting, well, the winds are a little bit stronger out of the east, but not too bad. You get to the Central Pacific, you almost get the sense that winds are a little bit out of the west. Active phase, the MJO right there. And then in the West Pacific, the Kelvin wave generation area, well, neither really east nor west, just kind of a neutral pattern. So that doesn't really tell us a whole lot whether the active phase is, I would say maybe just looking at this active phase somewhere here between the date line and maybe Hawaii, something like that. Let's go look at the forecast for the next week. 850 millibars zonal wind anomalies. This is for the whole planet. The blues are easterly anomalies, roughly construed to be the inactive phase, the not our friend version of it. The reds, westerly anomalies, the active phase of the MJO. This is past performance here. This is the forecast down here, but this is over the entire planet. So we just want the Pacific. That's all we care about. Well, 180 is the date line. The far West Pacific starts about 125 east, so right in this area here. And the Kelvin wave generation area, the area where if the active phase is over it, it does best at pumping energy into the jet stream, ends at about 170 west. So you have a box right about in here. You can see in the past, we've been in the active phase of the MJO since probably about the last couple of days of January, and now And we said what? The active phase typically takes 4 to 6 weeks to get across the Pacific. So we've been 1-2 weeks there. Here's the next 2 weeks here. Active phase and solid westerly anomalies forecast. After that, it looks, by the end of February, it looks like things to settle down. This is our last big target here for the last active phase of the MJO. If you have the active phase, well, of course, the inactive phase comes after that. So that would probably be just eyeballing this somewhere in March, inactive phase. And then by the end of March, you're into spring and the El Nino pattern kind of collapses. So when I say this is the last big hurrah, the next 2 weeks, this is what is driving those words from my mouth. Next up, we'll look at outgoing long wave radiation predictions. It's just fancy words for cloud cover. The blues are cloudier areas that if the active phase of the MJ is a low pressure system, it's typically going to be lifting warm moist air aloft, creating clouds as that warm moist air condenses as it gets in the upper atmosphere. The reds are dry air, high pressure, cloud free skies. So this is a statistic model. There's South America, Central America, Hawaii, New Guinea there, Australia, the equator right there, the date line right there, Kelvin wave generation area right here. So you can see the active phase of the MJO in control per the statistic model right now, holding 5 days from now, and then starting to move out of the Kelvin wave generation area 10 days from now, and pretty much out 15 days from now. That'd be 2 weeks from now, with the inactive phase moving into the far west Pacific. Now, that's the statistic model. The dynamic model paints a different picture, suggesting the active phase holding, and then 2 weeks out, just basically dissipating with the inactive phase, not pushing into the Pacific, but dissipating as well. So a vastly different picture between the dynamic model there, the last day, 2 weeks out, and the statistic model here. Let's go look at the phase diagrams. This is the phase diagram for the statistic model, phase diagram for the dynamic model. How do you read this? Well, this tracks where the active phase is, not the inactive, just the active. The heavy dot is where the active phase is. And it typically moves. You can see this is past performance. When this is January, where it was, and then into February, waffling around here in the West Pacific. So the MJO moves from west to east, from the Indian Ocean to the Maritime Continent, to the West Pacific, to the East Pacific, under the United States, across the Atlantic, over North Africa, and back to the Indian Ocean. The further the dots are away from the circle here, the stronger the active phase is. So active phase over the Maritime Continent, pretty strong, like moderately, if not strong, the 18th of January, and even the whole way into February. And now it is just about somewhere in the East Pacific somewhere, we'll say south of Hawaii on the equator, and forecast over the next 2 weeks to move over Africa. That's per the statistic model. Dynamic model, pretty much showing the same thing, and it incredibly weak 2 weeks from now. Then we go look at the CFS model. This goes out a month. This is past performance here. This is the forecast here a whole month. These are week-long increments. This shows the actual MJO, and let's get ourselves oriented first. The date line runs right up the middle. Again, we only care about the Pacific. Far West Pacific starts about 125 west. Kelvin wave generation area ends about 170 west, so right in here. You can see the MJO, the black line. Solid active phase of the MJO. The reds are westerly anomalies back in November. Dotted contour is the inactive phase with easterly anomalies associated with it. Then another strong active phase right from December the whole way through Christmas. But then notice this moving south of California and out of the Kelvin wave generation areas we got later in the month. And then inactive phase set up for most of January. And then here's our active phase right now. We've had a couple of good bursts of westerly winds. Another good burst of westerly winds are forecast through probably, what's that, about the 20th of February or so. So another 9 days, something like that. And even after that, westerly anomalies holding. But then you see the inactive phase starting to set up as we get into March. And things will probably shut down then. We have one more model to look at. This is the same CFS model, but this depiction of it goes out 3 months. Past performance down here, the forecast up here, just eyeballing it. There's the date line right up the middle. Kelvin wave generation area starts about 125 east. You can see active phase of the MJO. Active phase, this is what, October, November, December. Inactive phase in January, and then here's our current active phase, looking very solid. Now this suggests it holding in some fashion out into even maybe past the first week of March, but then you have easterly anomalies pushing through the Kelvin wave generation area, we'll say March 10th through about April 10th, something like that. And then then our next active phase comes, but it's pretty weak. It's in springtime. The MJO starts falling apart in spring, and probably no substantial support for, I mean, that's not to say there won't be storms and gales, but, nothing like, this is probably the last hurrah right here. Let's overlay the MJO. All right, so you can see active phase. This was back in October, another one in November, a big one in December. Here's our current one, which is even bigger than the one in December, and looking quite solid, holding in some fashion even up into here. So again, about March 7th or something like that. And then we go into the inactive phase, which is already trying to push into the far west Pacific, but its effects not really becoming manifest until March 7th or something like that, into about April 12th or so, and then our final active phase beyond that. Let's overlay a low-pass filter. So this is your El Nino, La Nina indicator. The black contour is a low-pressure bias, a tendency towards low pressure, or basically the El Nino indicator. We had 4 contour lines back in November into early January. We're at the fading phase of El Nino now with 3 contour lines, but holding into the end of March even. Second contour line starts fading in April, and then by the time we get into May, El Nino pretty much fading out. The leading edge of the low-pressure bias has been knocking on California's door since October and is only pushing deeper into the southwest U.S. states, but losing energy at the same time. All right, so our teaser or title of this week's video was El Nino's in the atmosphere. What about the ocean? And you could probably guess, if you're a longtime follower, you know what's going on. We're looking at subsurface temperature anomalies, all right? This is what feeds the whole El Nino machine, driven by the active phase and westerly wind bursts. We're looking at data from the TAO buoy array. This is the West Pacific here, East Pacific here. These X's are anchors on the buoys. The X's themselves are sensors strung down the anchor lines. Use that data with a model to fill in the gaps. You get a profile of the subsurface temperature of what's going on. 30-degree anomalies backtracking. They were at 180 2 weeks ago. They're back to 172 and continuing to push off to the east, driven by trades. The 29-degree isotherm at 170. I think it was over at 168 last week. The 28-degree isotherm, well, it was hanging for a long time around 140, slowly starting to retrograde. But notice just a little bit here. This is the last bit of probably warm water gurgling up to the surface from multiple previous Kelvin waves. The 24-degree isotherm, well, it was down at 50. It was even down at 60 at one point, but it's getting shallower and shallower, suggesting the warm pool in the east is collapsing, not unexpected. It's at about maybe 30 meters deep. But it's not the actual water temperatures. It is the anomalies, the difference from normal for this time of year. And you can see the last of our warm pool here at 3 degrees above normal, still holding on, not too bad, gurgling up. You can see gurgling up to the surface here, but nowhere near as warm as it was. We had 5 and 6 and even 7-degree warm anomalies filling and going much deeper months ago. This is the last of El Nino. You see 1 and 2 degree anomalies here, but that is what that really is this warm water getting dragged to the east by trades and just sort of filling in here. What we really have, the thermocline, which goes from like 100 down to about 150 here, is all full of colder than normal water. This is the beginnings of a probable La Nina setting up, with the coldest waters just barely hanging on here. They're being blocked from erupting to the surface by the last of this warm water, maybe couple of weeks worth, but at some point this is all going to gurgle to the surface, start getting dragged by trades off to the west, and the cold water, it's like a cold water Kelvin wave, will erupt, and that will be the end of El Nino in the ocean. Here's another version of that picture. This is a mixture of both the buoy data that we saw previous, but also some satellite data mixed in. We'll take a look at the satellite data in a second, but it basically paints the same picture. This says 4 to 5 degree anomalies over here, and Ecuador is right at 80, so it's a very limited small pocket here. You see the cold water pushing up. It can't quite break down the door yet, but as soon as this warm water's out of here, it's all over. Pentad sea level anomalies. This is the satellite data I was talking about. Chile here, Peru, Ecuador, that little thing there, that's the Galapagos. Central America, Mexico, the date line there, the equator there, New Guinea there. This is showing you the height of the sphere of the ocean. Okay, why does that matter? Well, if you have warm water at depth, it expands. And when it expands, it displaces the water above it up to the surface, creates a bulge. So if you have a bulge like 0 centimeters, but 5 centimeters, like here and here and here, just 5 degrees north and south of the equator, that's all that matters. So we see this is the last little area of our warm pool that's holding on. Actually, this is new out here, out the date line, but still not a whole lot. There is still some warm water hanging in pockets, but you also notice a hole in it right there. In fact, there's one other chart I want to look at. We'll just run this loop through so you can see this is the same thing we had before. Here's we're back in December, all warm water. You see the cold water slowly digging its way in as we get into February. There's February 7th. You can see the degradation of the warm pool. Still present, but slowly fading. And then there's one other animation here. This is the other data showing you just where the warm water is. You see the cold water slowly rising up here and warm water pushing off to the east over time as we get into February, the demise of our El Nino warm pool. And yet one more image, upper ocean heat anomalies. This goes back in time, February last year to February of this year. East Pacific here, West Pacific here. The beginning of our El Nino, you can literally see Kelvin waves. I think this was number 2, number 3, number 4 moving from west to east, number 5, number 6, number 7, and there, actually I was probably off by 1, but you get the general idea. The last of the warm pool just hanging right here, Ecuador there, so what is that, 10, almost 20 degrees, we'll say 1,000 nautical miles off of Ecuador, and that's it. Yes, there's marginally warm water out beyond that, out to a point south of about California, but you also see the cold water pool starting to build in the upper 300 meters of the ocean and pushing off to the east. Sea surface temperature anomalies, you can see it here. Temperatures steadily declining if you watch this week to week. This used to be a much darker, more contiguous shade of orange and darker orange. Still, lots of warm water here, but you get these pockets and these little eddies in here of cooling waters, suggesting the demise of the El Nino warm pool. All this warm water slowly making its way off to the west, eventually going to be all sequestered up here in the far West Pacific, and then at some point you're going to start seeing blues erupting here, maybe 3 or 4 weeks out, something like that, suggesting the complete demise of El Nino. Sea surface temperature trend for the past 7 days. We actually have warming. I think this is more of like a seasonal warming thing down here, but these pockets right here, I think what this is the last of the subsurface warm temperatures. You know, I said like 3 weeks worth. It's being squeezed up to the surface, bleeding out on the surface by cold water underneath it. We'll take it while we have it, but at some point you're going to start seeing a good pattern of blues building in here and darker blues. And that'll be the end of our El Nino. And then the surface overview here, again, the same sort of pattern. Now, when I say the demise of El Nino, I mean really in the ocean, in the atmosphere. It's not going to change anytime soon. We've had this warm pool building up here for almost a year. The atmosphere isn't just going to turn on a dime. It'll take probably till December, right around Christmas, maybe even a little bit later of this year. So 9 months from now, before the effects of cold water here really start working their way into the atmosphere and start having an effect on the jet stream. There is so much warm air and moist air in the jet stream. And then you had the Tonga volcano, which also just dumped massive amounts of warm, moist air into the atmosphere. That's all not going to disappear overnight. So I think this El Nino, though maybe not as insanely strong as the hype might have you believe, its effects will linger in the atmosphere for quite a while, probably 9 months from now. Sea surface temperature trend in the Nino 1.2 region. This is just the area right there by the Galapagos in Ecuador. You actually see an uptick in the past week and a half. Again, I think this is the cold water underneath squeezing the last of the warm water out. Temperature plus 1.101 degrees. So that's still significant. Certainly not at neutral, certainly not cold, still warmer, but it was much warmer. We were up in the 3s or 3.5 degrees back in, I don't know, when was that? Maybe July or August, something like that. Then we go to the official, well, not the official, but the official El Nino monitoring region, the Nino 3.4 region. This is the area on the equator south of California out to about the date line. This is not the official data. It's just sort of a rough trend you can use. Values still plus 1.152 degrees above normal. So if you're between half a degree below and half a degree above normal, that's considered neutral. But if you're from half a degree to 1 degree above normal, that is considered a weak El Nino. From 1 degree to 1.5 degrees, that's a moderate El Nino. From 1.5 degrees to 2 degrees, that's a strong El Nino. And 2 degrees and above, that's a super El Nino. And officially, it has to be for 3 consecutive months. And every one of these ticks is like by the day sort of thing. So, and this isn't the official data, but still, even in the most conservative of views, we're still in a moderate El Nino. But let's go look at some other data. Here's a depiction of sea surface temperature anomalies for the whole past year, West Pacific here, East Pacific here. The beginnings of our El Nino back in March and April. Warm Kelvin waves erupting off of Ecuador, slowly getting caught by trades backfilling across the equatorial Pacific. We peaked out somewhere right around in December, January, even into the first part of January. But you see now, not as intense a warming, but still, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 shades. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1.5 to 2 degrees over a good portion here. That's pretty solid indeed. In fact, let's go look at some other data. This is weekly data. This is Nino 1.2 here. This is Nino 3. This is the official El Nino region, the Nino 3.4 data. And this is the real data. So as of the week centered on January 31st, our anomaly was 1.8 degrees. Earlier in January, 1.7, 1.7, 1.9, 1.9. But then we were just about continuously at 2s in December and pretty much a good chunk of November. So this sort of paints the weekly picture. Then let's go look at the monthly picture. These are the average temperatures for the entire month of like August, 1.35 degrees in the official El Nino monitoring region, building to 1.6 in September, October 1.7, November 2.02. December 2.02, and now January 1.87. So remember, it's not any one month, it's 3 months. These are the 3 highest months. You put that all together, and again, if you're at a 2 or higher for that 3-month area, that's considered super El Nino. We are tantalizingly close to that. In fact, let's go look at one more chart and we'll find out exactly how we did for this year. And the assumption is after January, the numbers are going to start falling off. So this is our peak time right here. All right, so here are 3 months, December, January, February, March, a rolling 3-month average For August, September, October, we were at 1.6. September, October, November, 1.8. October, November, December, 1.9. And November, December, January, 2.0. Theoretically, if this doesn't get revised, that puts us in bare minimum super El Nino status. Now you go, well, was this really a super El Nino? We're looking at the rainfall amounts and we're going, yeah, I mean, we're getting, near 100% of normal. I mean, some places in Southern California certainly felt like a super El Nino, but in terms of surf, we've had a couple of big swells, but not the consistency that one would really expect from a super El Nino. But then the next thing is, well, we got to put some things in perspective. Look at what happened during the 2015 quote unquote super El Nino. We were in July at 1.9, whereas we were 1.3 this year. Went up to 2.2. That's a 3-month average, August, September, October, up to 2.4, 2.6, 2.6. You get the idea. A much longer duration of much warmer temperatures than this year's El Nino. And then let's see if we can go back to 1997 just for fun. 2.1, 2.3, 2.4, 2.4, 2.2, 1.9. That said, this data doesn't tell the whole picture because this El Nino was definitely stronger than in terms of surf and weather than the 2015 El Nino. And then we go back to, just for fun, the 82, 83 El Nino, which was almost as strong as the 97. It was a 2.2, 2.2, 2.2. So this doesn't tell the complete picture. It tells you water temperatures, but it doesn't integrate it to tell you how the atmosphere actually responded in terms of storm production, snow production, wind and surf and all that sort of thing. Still, it's a good guide. And the good news is, if you're looking for records, at least for the moment, we reached bare minimum super El Nino status. Hooray. All right, we've been griping that the Southern Oscillation Index has not been negative. What's the Southern Oscillation Index? It's just a measure of how the atmosphere is responding to the presence of El Nino. It's the difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, roughly in the Indian Ocean, and Tahiti in the Pacific. If pressure is lower in the Pacific, as one would expect looking at all the charts and with El Nino, the index should be negative. Hey, look at this, minus 37.51, a legitimate negative number. And we were up at minus 46.54 a couple of days ago. And really, we've been on a good negative run since, I'll say even late January. But this is the first real good run of negative numbers we had in a very long time. We were complaining that the Southern Oscillation Index wasn't really reflecting what was going on, or maybe it was, but that higher than normal pressure was set up over the South Pacific, and that might have been driven by the cold PDO, and we could get all into that. But at least for the moment, it looks like the atmosphere is in sync with the MJO with El Nino, but too little, too late. 30-day average, let's see if we get that in right here. 30-day average down to minus 10.99. This guy should be at minus 25 if we were in real super El Nino. We have not, just scanning down here, we're not even close. And the 90-day average, this should be at minus 15. We're at minus 5.33. And you see, we haven't really gone anywhere. So this El Nino did not, though the water temperatures look good and all sorts of other stuff look good, from an atmospheric perspective, it did not couple with the ocean as well as previous strong El Ninos. Now, I'm not complaining. Any El Nino is better than no El Nino, and it's certainly better than La Nina. But this El Nino seems like it kind of underperformed. Here's a 30-day moving SOI graphed out. You can see back here in La Nina, we were up at plus 20. Likewise, if we were in deep major El Nino, we should be down at minus 20. We got there for like 2 days back in June, and that was about it. We made another little one-day stab at it somewhere in September. Here's our little downward push, but you could see this El Nino just did not do what was expected of it. And then finally, the forecast from the CFS version 2 model for sea surface temperatures in the Nino 3.4 region. You can see, let's see, there's January. Here is where we were. This is the data here that got us to the barely 2.0 reading. And you can see the trend from here is steadily downward. I think this is a little extreme. It's saying by, mid-February, which would be somewhere right around in here. We should be at plus 1.2 degrees. I think we're going to be a little bit higher than that. But you see it just going off a cliff and going somewhere down into deep La Nina territory in October. I think this is overhyping it. Remember, there is the spring unpredictability barrier. It's that time from I think it's late mid-March out to about the 1st of June. The models have a real time knowing what's going on. So this is just a wild guess at the moment. That said, it is pretty normal to go from El Nino back into La Nina. And with the PDO being as negative as it is, that is only going to help enhance that steep drop-off back into colder waters. So the good news is the models are teasing. We have at least one big storm still coming to produce large surf targeting Hawaii and the U.S. West Coast. Downside is there might be a bunch of wind with it, but there's some other storms forecast after that. And the active phase of the MJO is supposed to continue the whole way through pretty much the end of February. So there's multiple opportunities still for surf and snow and rain. But after that, we move into the inactive phase of the MJO. I think March is going to be pretty slow. And then after that, it's going to be grab whatever you can get before we move into the summertime, a summertime regime. After that, though, it looks, at least for the moment, like we're heading towards La Nina. We'll go look at some of the other models. The consensus model, let's see, it'll update around the 20th of February. So we can look at every model and see what they're saying. Maybe get a little bit better, a more nuanced and a little bit more better defined read on where we're actually heading and if La Nina's coming. Still don't know, but it seems likely it will. The question is just how deep. All right. If you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. If you have any question or concern, write them up in the comments section. If you'd like to make a small contribution, we would appreciate it. Use the special thanks button down below, the heart with a $sign in it. And, of course, be sure and subscribe. Hit the Stormsurf icon down in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Get all signed up. You'll get those automatic notifications when we post the videos. And other than that, go surfing, go skiing. Make the most of the weather that's coming while we have it, and be safe and have fun, and we'll see you next week.